morning, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. And a very, very warm welcome to each and every one of you who has joined us this morning for the 5th edition of the South Africa-Italy Summit, held right here in Africa's richest square mile. My name is Lynette Nduli, and I will be your summit chairperson over the next 2 days as we lead thought-provoking, interactive, as well as relevant conversations about creating partnership, creating projects, investor confidence, and interest between the economies of not just South Africa and Italy, but between the economies of Europe and Africa. Thank you very much to our hosts this morning who are already seated behind me, but more specifically to the European House Ambrosetti Group, who are represented here by Valerio Di Molli and his team, who I'll introduce a little bit later, who for the 5th year have brought this private think tank's initiative to South Africa specifically. We'd also like to thank our hosts this morning, the Gauteng government, who are represented this morning by their HOD, who's also with us here. And we'd like to thank them for making sure that this conversation not only is relevant and top of mind, but is also a consistent growth story as South Africa begins to relook, rebuild, as well as reinvent its economic future. You will all agree that 2018, for not just the South African economy, but all the economies of the world, has perhaps been one of the most exciting, intriguing, and volatile. And I think what we can also all agree upon is that as these shifts and this volatility have happened in every single area of our society, whether it's politically, economically, culturally, socially, and in all the different areas that you and I are influenced and influence in our various economies, all of our institutions, our parties, our governments, as well as our economic structures have all in one way or the other been impacted. Through that impact, it does mean that you and I cannot stand still. You and I have always got to be thinking about ways to reinvent the game, to partner differently, to participate in conversations and engagements of this nature, not just to hear thought leadership and to follow trends, but perhaps more importantly, to start to structure this new future. That volatility, which is our new business as usual, is increasingly pressurizing us to do so. Italy and South Africa are not strangers to each other. Not only do we as people have so much in common, whether it is our taste for life, our sense of community, the importance of family, music, culture, football, and carbohydrates, pap and pasta, are shared between us. And it's fitting that this collaboration, this commonality between the peoples of these two countries also extends to benefit our mutual economies, to benefit growth, to benefit infrastructure, industry, technology, science, planning, and collaboration, whether it's in our urban spaces or whether we're planning reforms around policy through this summit. So thank you very much to everybody who is visiting, but is also a local participant in this conversation. And what I certainly hope for each of you is that at the end of tomorrow, you each leave with a better sense of what the drivers as well as the results of collaboration and partnership used through innovation and through platforms such as these will enable us to do together as we move forward. The highlights of the 2018 summit for each of you will definitely be starting to take a very incisive and a detailed look at everything from financial tools as we look at investability between Africa and Europe, synergies that exist in different sectors of the economy. Tomorrow in particular, we'll be talking everything from tourism to transport, as well as taking academic views around science and manufacturing. I think we can also all agree that all of these big plans and propositions are not possible without making sure that our policies, our processes, and our people are aligned. So the all-important conversation related to skills development, making sure that our economies are inclusive of everyone from women to young people to perhaps even marginalized populations within the two continents is quite important as well. And as each of you know in the audience today, nothing is possible anymore without the horizontal that is known as technology. We're all here because of technology, and we're certainly beginning to see technology as well as the concept of smart enter every single possible industry, activity, as well as initiative that each of you may be currently involved in. It's important to us to, as we start today, to reflect on the vision of why this summit exists, as well as some of the key activities that have been, as well as those that we certainly continue as we've now reached this critical fifth-year milestone of the Africa-Europe dialogue that the South Africa-Italy summit enables us to do. Many of you have been involved with this initiative for many years, and many of you are part of the CEO dialogue as an initiative of this summit, for instance, where CEOs from both continents are able to not only collaborate, but also engage in terms of what their contributions will be across policy as well as industrial activity and investor confidence between the two regions. All of you follow trends. All of you follow what is happening in your various markets and economies. And it is therefore fitting that the Ambrosetti Group, who are Italy's #1 think tank for the 5th year running, are here to not only share those trends as well as the research that they participate in as well as formulate, but are also here to make sure that you and I can take these trends and begin to use it to connect the very necessary dots that we have to create in our economies that will propel as well as accelerate economic activity between the two regions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for the purposes of housekeeping, I would just like to inform you of the following. In 2018, I don't think I need to tell you that cell phones should be on silent, but I'm also relying on you to tell your colleagues, to tell your influencer circles, as well as to share with those who follow you on the various social media platforms, as well as with us, what your thoughts are, what your highlights of this conference have been, and perhaps some of the best practice you are currently working on. So, to those of you who are on social media, for the purposes of the summit, our hashtag this year is SAITS18. And please do follow the handles of both the Ambrosetti Group. I know the Gauteng government is also participating, as well as the different speakers who are here. We're delighted that so many of our speakers and thought leaders who are joining us today will also be here for the extent of the full day, as well as the summit itself. So if we don't reach you in the time that has been allocated during our various question and answers, you will note on the program that much time has been dedicated to lunches, to breakaways, as well as to enable the conversation to continue well past what you will hear from the stage and the podium today. I would like at this point in time in our program to immediately also notify any members of the media who may be with us in the room that interviews and requests of that nature must please be directed to the team who are working around the summit, and they have a very specific room where you will be able to engage at more length and perhaps in detail with some of the speakers and thought leaders who are joining us here today. This summit has become the main event for Italian and South African entrepreneurial leadership in particular. So it's great to not only have policy makers and influencers in the room, but to also have a great many businesses and sectors represented here today. And we are effectively here through this conversation to strengthen our bilateral economic relations. And as we specifically build on that, these events of this nature, as well as the projects and initiatives that are born of it, continue to illustrate to each of us that partnership really does make the world go round. And my panel of speakers behind me this morning are testaments to the strength of partnership. 5 years in, here we are again, gathered in Johannesburg, joined by the forces that are behind me on stage. government, a think tank, as well as the private sector. You will see as I begin to introduce them more and more onto our program this morning. And so, to welcome us as our host is Mr. Valerio De Moli, who is perhaps familiar to many of you, but to those of you who are attending for the very first time, he is the managing partner and CEO of the European House Ambrosetti. Please give him a very warm welcome to the stage.
It's a great honor for me to be here with all of you, dear ministers from Africa and Europe, dear ambassadors, dear CEOs, dear ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to welcome you to the 5th edition of the South Africa-Italy Indaba, entitled Africa-Europe CEO Dialogue, and organized by my firm, the European House Ambrosetti, and Gauteng Provincial Government with other partners that I will introduce to you in a moment. Special thanks to Lynette, to you for being our chairperson since many years now, and thanks for your nice attitude towards us. Thank you very much indeed. Few facts about the European House Ambrosetti. With its more than 200 people sharing the same passion and drive, we've been working side by side with entrepreneurs globally to help them grow during the past 50 years. We service more than 400 clients. We do have more than 300 events. We involve more than 2,000 experts in all over the world. And for the 5th consecutive year, we've been ranked as the first Italian-based private think tank, number 7 in Europe and number 17 in the world, and we are in the short list of the top 100 most respected independent think tanks globally out of 6,150 ranked by the University of Pennsylvania in their famous index report. Our summit here, our Indaba, as you called it locally, is part also since this year of the support to the EU-South Africa Strategic Economic Partnership High-Level Group, and thanks to Stefano Manservisi and the European Commission for having included this in an institutional summit that is supposed to foster and induce better and more industrial cooperations and investments and trading links. Let me thank Mr. David Makura, the Premier of Gauteng, and Mrs. Baleni, the Director General of Gauteng, for hosting us in their province and for this outstanding venue and fantastic province. Thanks also to the many ministers and government representatives here. To Ambassador Pietro Donici from Italy goes our gratitude, as well as to Ambassador Soni from South Africa, and to the delegation of European Union, Ambassador of the Republic of South Africa, Marcus Cornaro, and the Director General for International Cooperation and Development, Stefano Manservisi. Thanks to all our advisors, starting from Alec Erwin here in the first row, and our partners, without whose support we wouldn't have been able to do this 5th edition. I'd like to mention them as a sign of gratitude: BBM Law, Magneto Automotive, PEO Group, Transnet, Alitalia, the European Union, Growth2N, Italtile, CTM, Gauteng Tourism, Business Day, and Land Rover and Jaguar. Thanks to all of you for your support, and we are grateful to you for that. Thanks to the Embassy of Italy in Pretoria, the Embassy of South Africa in Italy, the Italian Trade Agency, the Italian South African Chamber of Trade and Commerce, HIP Alliance, the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and the European Parliament for the patronage of this event. Thanks to all my team, led by Paolo Borzatta and Marina Mira Dercole, the project leader, and all the colleagues of ours from Europe as well as from South Africa involved, and particularly with Mr. Nico de Kock, and Optimize, the local partners of this operational initiative. I don't want to indulge too much in celebrating this 5th edition on the South Africa-Italy Indaba initiative, but I would like to point it out through through facts and few elements. First of all, the enlargement to Europe is not only a rebranding, but is the willingness we want to express to outline the key importance of the relationship Europe and Southern Africa in a broader concept. These achievements is the result of over 10 years of the European House Ambrosetti engagement with Africa, with its business, with its institutions and people. We want to put Southern Africa on the radar of European companies together with the many opportunities the region offers. At the base of this engagement and commitment, there has always been the certainty that the two regions are and will be vital for each other. A few numbers support this consideration. If you consider EU as a whole, EU as a system, our exports towards Southern Africa have returned to growth in the past year, plus 8.7%, and in fact, we are the leading major exporters, if we consider it as an entire unit, towards the region, and we reach the value of 72 billion, much higher than China, the US, and all other parts of the world. Is in fact, the value is almost twice the one from US, United Arab Emirates, and India combined together, and 15% higher than the Chinese one. Conversely, Southern Africa's exports towards the EU keep growing too, plus 6.5% in the past year, with a overall value of 69 billion at the end of 2017. And this is higher than the value of region's exports towards the United States and other parts of the world. EU has also affirmed as Africa's major partner for growth, with total FDI stock in the continent totaling 302 billion euros in 2017. Again, this is more than 5 times the United States FDIs and 8 times the Chinese ones, also thanks to historical EU presence in the region. These are facts, and I'd like to stress those elements. And that's why our Indaba is a key ingredient to do even better. And we believe that despite such incredible results, European companies and Southern African business can engage even much more, and we are below potential. The economic growth in Southern Africa region overall continues to recover steadily. The World Bank GDP growth is projected 3.5% 2019 and 3.7% growth into 2020. And Southern Africa is being plugged into major trade routes. Trade flows have increased steadily in the past decades, and future projections are also positive. Between 18 and 2020, import of goods and services will increase by 19% and exports by 16%, as well as gross capital inflows, and FDIs will continue to do it nicely and with good ecosystem. That's an important aspect, and the region has also successfully nurtured a new generation of entrepreneurs and leaders capable to drive economic and business performance and to build up knowledge, also and particularly among the SMEs environment, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Few facts about South Africa, which remains the regional economic powerhouse, a role that will maintain also in the years ahead. It accounts for 21.2% of Southern Africa GDP, 1/4 of the imports, and 30% of its exports. It is the first African country and the 5th country globally considering the amount of FDI in Southern Africa. It is the best placed location for raising capital, securing investments, and closing deals thanks to an advanced financial and legal system, which is highly important, and it is committed in achieving infrastructural excellence, deploying a 115 billion infrastructure program, pivotal to trigger trade within the continent and to allow African participation in global value chains. And Gauteng province in particular is leading this trend. It also leads in innovation. South Africa is first for R&D intensity among African countries, and with a good number of researchers per million people. In fact, is the first country in Africa also in high-tech sector. And what about Italy? Italy has been the top EU investor in Africa, considering FDIs in 2016. As far as 2017, looking at the United Nations UNCTAD World Investments Report, in terms of announced investments, Italy ranks the first, ahead than China, US, Saudi Arabia, UK, which is one important aspect that I want to stress, and it may also be very well an effort reached through our Indaba here, as a matter of fact. A few numbers about Italy. Italy is first in the European Union considering the number of SMEs in manufacturing. We have exactly the double numbers than Germany, for instance. We are second in the EU and fourth globally if we consider manufacturing value added. And we are among the only top 5 countries with trading balance in manufacturing above $100 billion. We are second, considering the Mannheim University ranking in terms of government policy favoring innovations for SMEs businesses, and we are first in the EU considering the number of references per researcher. We are third in the EU considering references in medicine, and first if we look only into oncology in Europe and therefore in the world. Second most representative country in the European Research Council starting grants, 2018 initiative prizing the youth researchers from Italy, and first in Europe considering pharmaceutical production ahead than Germany, which are key facts and statistics that are enlightening us and offering good platform of knowledge and technology to Southern Africa entrepreneurs as well. We have an increasing number of investments in the region, as I said, and again, among the Italian players that have already supported our summit are Perrigo, MA Automotive, Building Energy, CNH Industrial, Italian Railways System, Fiera di Milano, Terna, Alitalia, UB Bank, and there are other important Italian large investors in South Africa like ENI, Yenel, Iveco, and a few others that are not yet members of the community but may shortly become members. We will be distributing today and tomorrow 2 working papers made by my team, as well as 2 others shared with the European Union that you will have on your table. And I go to the end of my welcoming remarks now, asking you and offering to you all my team, which is at your full disposal for any need you may have to make your participation very fruitful and memorable. I wish you all a fruitful work and a pleasant stay to our Indaba, and thank you very much for the attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our host this morning, Mr. Demole, for his words of welcome, but perhaps for you and I, ladies and gentlemen, giving us some all-important contextual background about what this partnership still continues and aims to achieve. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this summit continues the commitments and the undertakings that were contained within the Memorandum of Agreement between the South African and the Italian governments that was signed in 2012. So what we're really doing here is continuing to concretize and accelerate work that was agreed upon 6 years ago. And this summit continues to enjoy the full support of both governments. And you will particularly see this as many of our guests and our speakers filter through our program, as well as the various events that will be staged around this conference over the next 2 days. Representing the Italian government in South Africa this morning, and on stage with me, is the ambassador to Italy in South Africa, Mr. Pietro Donici. Please give him a very warm round of applause.
Welcome to everybody. Thanks very much, Mrs. Ntuli. You made the customary acknowledgements I associate with you, so I don't have to repeat them. Thank you very much also to Mr. De Molli. You made a presentation that in a way undercut my presentation because you said a lot of things I was prepared to say. I'm tempted to withdraw, but don't worry, I will stay here so I can go on at leisure. First, this is the 5th edition of this summit. It goes without saying that the broad participation to it today show that it is a very successful experience. It is not anymore an experiment, and now it is a reality, a full-fledged, steady event in the South African and Italian landscape. Now I can give just a few indicators, because Mr. De Molli already gave most of them. I will focus the Italian-South African trade. In 2017, the total trade between the two countries grew by 10.5%. 2018, it already grew 11% in the first 7 months. We are ready to go further. The target of $4 billion that we just imagined a couple of years ago. I'm talking of bilateral trade to Italy. So this shows in substantial terms that we cannot but be very, very happy about the bilateral relations between Italy and South Africa, and that our companies consider this market, this country, as a place where invest, a very important and successful place. Let's go now to the quality of this trade and of this investment relationship. More than 30% of Italian export of South Africa are classified under machinery and mechanical appliances. Other entries include chemical, pharmaceuticals, industrial oils, plastics, and various kinds of instruments and tools. In more general terms, nearly 70% of Italian export to South Africa are investment and intermediate goods. Why do I quote these figures? Because this proves that we do not compete with the local industry. We do not undercut local manufacturers. On the contrary, an increase of imports from Italy usually signals a growth in South African industrial output. This because the greatest part of our products enter South Africa and take part in the value chain, in the local value chain, sustaining economic growth and industrial output and job creation. In a way, this also applies to South African exports to Italy. South African products exported to Italy are included also in Italian production processes, and therefore they contribute to Italian industrial output. Also, the inverted seasons are the quality of South African products increasingly make Italy a destination for Italian export in the primary sector in the agro-food products. We are not protectionist about them. We are glad to have entered together with the the European Union the EPA agreement in order to foster bilateral trade and also South African and South-EU exports to Italy. Furthermore, Italian companies here in South Africa take part in the beneficiation of local resources, of local primary products, again, sustaining the growth of already well-established local industries. This pattern then can be identified as a successful business-to-business pattern. And this is also proved by the very presence of so many Italian companies today which are interested in networking, knowing, make acquaintances with the local companies and local authorities. In this respect, I wish also to welcome the decision made by the new South African government after February 2018 to give new boost to the PPP in the field of energy, of new energies, to which Italian and also European companies are very much interested that are contractors. We are sure that the initial steps made by Minister Ndadebi will be followed by new concrete implementations. The success we achieved so far, in my view, indicates also the way forward. If we have been so successful in capital goods, intermediate goods, Italian companies have to insist in these sectors. Of course, not neglecting new sectors as the blue economy, smart technologies, industry 4.0, and aerospace and information technology. The interest we have here in high technologies in South Africa is witnessed by the new boost we are giving to the bilateral agreement on scientific and technological cooperation. This year we signed with the South African government a new joint research program that will last 4 years. We have new funding from both parties because we are equal also in funding, that increased the previous allotment, I think, a fourfold. Space, astrophysics, radioastronomy, usage of water resources, biotechnology and pharmacological research are the sectors we identified for common cooperation. As you can see, our companies and also my government identify South Africa as an equal partner, not just as a source of raw materials or as a market where to sell our consumer goods. In this respect, in Pretoria, tomorrow we start a two-day bilateral workshop between South Africa and Italy on radioastronomy, which we organized with our South African friends, and to which will take part the Deputy Minister, Vice Minister Fioramonti. We see her today, and I thank you very much for coming back with so much enthusiasm to his South Africa. Vice Minister and Professor Fioramonti today will approach this Indaba focusing on bilateral scientific technology and cooperation and technology, focusing also in the positive fallout for both countries of this common experience. As you know, and as Mr. De Molli already highlighted, Italy is the second largest manufacturer in Europe and the second exporter in South Africa from the Euro area. As I was telling to some of your leaders a few minutes ago when we had breakfast together, we don't want to come here just to show how good we are, so to lecture you. What we want to do is to work together with you. We want to work with your workforce. We want to work with your technicians. We want to form them when it is necessary. We want to leave a trace in your social and economic texture. because we think that when we act together on the basis of a common interest, things work well for both of us and also for ourselves. So in a way, we have an ethical approach, but we are also aware that this approach pays. I would like to add now just a few things, because my time is elapsing, I see. A great deal of this strong growth in bilateral relations is is owed to the South African Italian community. As some of you know, we have around 50,000 Italians here, or people of Italian origin. Of course, they know perfectly South Africa because they are like a fish in their own water, but they know also Italy. So knowing the strengths of the Italian economy, of the Italian companies, of Italian SMEs, they are the bridge between two countries. They are a strong factor which unites our two countries. Second, we know that there are grim outlooks and dark expectations all over the world. Sometimes refer to Italy, other times refer even to South Africa. Often, of course, they express sectional interests. Of course, we don't adhere from these points of view. We prefer to look at hard facts and at the people who actually get things done. We have a lot of figures. Many of them have been said by Mr. De Molle. I don't repeat them. So we have a great deal of practice and reality to inspire our optimism, so to say. This summit focuses also not only to South Africa, which would be more than enough given its size and economic strength and potential for growth, but also for the surrounding countries. Some of them I know very well. And we as Italy and European Union, of course, we are very much committed to EPA, which is directed to the SECU region and to SADC region. We are very much in favor of FTA in Africa, of course, because we are committed to Africa, and because we know that South Africa is so far, and I'm afraid for long, the best springboard to go to Africa, make business, trade, and investment. As everyone already knows, my government is very much committed to Africa for reasons which are so evident, obvious, being Italy bordering Africa, actually, and sharing much of the destiny of Africa. So we are committed to Africa. In 2 days, we start in Rome the second Italy-Africa conference, where ministers from all over Africa will gather to discuss, together with Italian counterparts, the future of our two continents, and of course what Europe, what Italy can do in order to improve, to go deepen for the development of Africa and for the well-being of South African and African residents. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Ambassador Donici for his words of welcome, first and foremost, to his guests who are also in the country. To those of you who are participating in our program, you know that tomorrow he'll also be hosting us at his residence in Pretoria, and we certainly hope to learn a little bit more about what the ambassador and his team are currently doing, not just in South Africa, but around the continent. And thank you again to him for emphasizing the importance of cooperation at multiple stakeholder levels to make sure that economic participation, inclusivity, and of course growth continues to happen. Now, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is our Director General of the Gauteng government and also our official representative for the Premier of the province, Ms. Phindile Baleni. A very interesting fact, Gauteng, ladies and gentlemen, contributes 1/3 of South Africa's overall GDP numbers. And if, for whatever reason, Gauteng decided to break away from South Africa and stand on its own, its GDP is comparable to that of North African nation Morocco, and it would be, on its own, in the top 10 GDPs of the African continent, right there, a little bit above Kenya, and even a few of our East African counterparts. So when I say we are certainly in the richest square mile in Africa, I mean it. A very warm welcome to our hosts this morning, the Gauteng Provincial Government, represented by Ms. Phindile Baleni.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Program Director. I need to assure this room that Gauteng has no secessionist ambitions. To you, the Program Director, heads of delegations from national and regional governments present here, ministers and deputy ministers, members of the Executive Council of the Gauteng Provincial Executive, Mr. Valerie Demoli, the Managing Director and CEO of Europe House, Ambrosetti, His Excellency Pietro Giovanni Donici, the Ambassador of Italy to South Africa, His Excellency, in his absence, Shirish Soni, the South African Ambassador to Italy, members of the Diplomatic Corps, business leaders from South Africa, the SADC region, the continent, as well as your counterparts from Italy and the continental Europe, heads of parastatals, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Premier, the Honorable David Makura, the government and the people of Gauteng, I welcome you to this 5th edition of the South Africa-Italy Indaba. This year marks the 3rd year that this important event is being hosted in the Gauteng City region, Africa's 7th largest economy, Sub-Saharan's financial and technological nerve center, the manufacturing hub of SADC, and South Africa's economic powerhouse. Ladies and gentlemen, it was the late president of the African National Congress, O.R. Tambo, a great friend of the people of Italy, who once reminded us that as South Africans, we are linked with the people of Italy with profound attachment and immense gratitude that is hard to put into words. These words by O.R. Tambo, together with the formidable bond of friendship and solidarity that he built with the Italian people during the dark days of our struggle for liberation, continue to inspire us up to this day. They guide the work we are doing with our Italian counterparts to build on the foundation laid by those who came before us, to further strengthen political, economic, trade, investment, as well as people-to-people relations between our two countries. We are on record having said that the Gauteng South Africa-Italy Indaba represents the most comprehensive model of how, as a province, a sub-national government, we can engage in efforts to strengthen relations with key economies in the SADC region, in our continent, as well as in the rest of the world in terms of our own strategies. It is, to us, a matter of pride that over the years, this Indaba has evolved into a pan-African and pan-European platform to build strategic partnerships between our governments, our institutions, our firms, as well as our peoples. In addition to improving our trade relations, the Indaba has played a key role in fostering closer cooperation in areas such as early childhood development, the automotive sector, the cooperatives movement, climate change, and in particular water security, tourism, heritage, and sports. We are particularly excited that this year the Indaba will focus specifically on encouraging dialogue between entrepreneurs and business leaders from our respective countries, regions, as well as continents. This is a significant development, for we know it too well that while governments can create the necessary environment for trade and investment to happen, it is business leaders themselves, those at the coalface of industry and commerce, who must make business happen and who must take advantage of the opportunities created. In particular, this year, we hope to build on the critical role the Indaba has played in deepening our mutual knowledge and collaboration between business people in the two countries. Program Director, we look back with pride on the road that we have traveled since this Indaba was first held here in the Gauteng province 3 years ago. According to the Italian South African Chamber of Commerce, no less than 9 Italian companies have recently invested in South Africa. Many of them have a significant footprint in Gauteng. They include Enel Green Energy Power RSA, Lucini RS, Mapei, Ariston Thermal Group, and New Holland. Now, both Ambassador and the MD of European House Ambrossetti have given you the numbers of the trade, the size of the trade between South Africa and Italy. Of those figures, and of particular interest to us in Gauteng, is that in Gauteng, between 2013 and 2017, Gauteng exported 2.1 US billion worth of goods and services to Italy. Over the same period, goods and services imported from Italy into Gauteng amounted to 6.6 billion US dollars. We're encouraged that Gauteng now accounts for 62% of the total trade between South Africa and Italy. The bulk of Gauteng's exports, as already indicated to Italy, include mineral fuels as well as iron and steel, while our imports are largely electrical machinery, equipment, boilers, as well as vehicles. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no doubt that the work we are doing to strengthen trade between our countries is bearing fruit. We must now not look back. We must continue to strive for greater and more balanced trade amongst ourselves. As we chart our way forward, we must draw courage in the knowledge that this year's Indaba is taking place at a time when the IMF projects GDP growth for sub-Saharan Africa to reach 3.4% in 2018 and 3.7% in 2019. This is also the time when foreign direct investment, especially into SADC countries, is on the rise. From 2007 to 2016, FDI inflows to Southern African countries increased by 47.2%, emphatically making the point that our region is open for business and it is investable. As you may be aware, the South African government is currently implementing a set of measures aimed at stimulating our national economy, which is a leading economy in the SADC region. More measures to further stimulate our national economy will be announced in the coming weeks. We have noted with appreciation the October 28 report of the ABSA Africa Financial Market Index, which indicates that despite some challenges in our domestic economy, South Africa is still the most attractive financial market for international investors in Africa. According to the report, South Africa is also amongst the leading countries in Africa when it comes to lowering the barriers to entry for small businesses. Also encouraging are indications that 45% of FDI flows into Southern Africa comes to South Africa. As a driver of the South African economy, the Gauteng province will also announce specific measures that will stimulate and ensure recovery for the Gauteng economy. And these will happen in the next 2 weeks. I am not at liberty to disclose them here. We believe that collectively these interventions will go a long way in helping to turn around the fortunes of Gauteng and the South African region, the South African economy, as well as the region's economy. These interventions will also help increase the attractiveness of our economy to FDI. To further drive investment into our country, as from the 25th to the 27th of October, this month, in fact, later this week, His Excellency President Cyril Ramaphosa will host the South African Investment Conference. Furthermore, from the 7th to the 9th of November this year, Gauteng Province, in partnership with the African Development Bank, will be hosting the inaugural Africa Investment Forum, which is the premier African investment marketplace. We believe that these events will offer a much-needed global and continental platform that will help catalyze investment into Gauteng, into South Africa, into the SADC region, but more importantly, into the continent of Africa. The key message we're making at these forums is that our country is open for business, our continent is open for business. As a province, we pride ourselves of our state-of-the-art infrastructure, a sound and investor-friendly regulatory environment supported by highly efficient Invest SA Gauteng, our one-stop shop for assisting with fast-tracking applications and improving the ease of doing business. We have consistently made the point that here in Gauteng, red tape and bureaucratic inertia has been declared as enemies of investment. We are therefore tackling them with the greatest of urgency. Our provincial government has strong relations with several regional and state governments in major African economies. Both in word and in action, we are proponents of a clean, transparent, efficient, and ethical government. All of these things are a practical demonstration that Gauteng is open for business. Gauteng is not only the gateway to the continent, but also Gauteng-based firms are significant investors on the continent. The Premier wishes this Indaba all the success. May the relations between South Africa, SADC, our continent, Italy, and Europe grow in leaps and bounds. It is my privilege, on behalf of the Premier of Gauteng, to declare the Gauteng South Africa-Italy Indaba officially opened. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those words of welcome and for officially opening the SA-Italy Summit to our Director General of the Gauteng Province, ladies and gentlemen. And a warm word of thanks to my panel this morning. We will now be leaving the stage, and I will then welcome to the stage somebody else on our program to take over our very first conversation as we talk particularly around the issues of investor confidence and creating competitiveness in our local as well as our global economies. Please give them a round of applause. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a great pleasure at this part in our conversation this morning to introduce two gentlemen who are very familiar faces to those of you who participate in the economies of South Africa, but of course in various global institutions as well. Mr. Alec Irwin is not only an advisor to the Ambrosetti Group on this particular summit, but he is also the executive chair of UBU Investment Holdings. Now, to those of you who know his history in our public service, he served the South African government between 1994 at the dawn of democracy to 2008 in various positions, but perhaps namely as a deputy minister initially, and then a minister in our economic cluster, right the way through from our treasury to our public enterprises. So he's certainly a gentleman who continues to contribute to our nation building in that cluster and the conversations, the necessary courageous conversations that we have got to have if growth, inclusivity, as well as competitiveness are going to be at the forefront of our agenda. This morning, he will be in conversation with the former Minister of Finance, as well as Minister in our Planning and Coordination in the South African government, Mr. Trevor Manuel, who today also has moved on to the private sector, but as many of you will know, is one of South Africa's investment envoys, as appointed by our president within the 2018 year. Not a light task, and we will certainly be hearing about what he has been busy with as we near the investment summit, which was alluded to already by our Director General, which will be taking place right here in Johannesburg this week. So please may I give both gentlemen a very warm welcome to the stage, and if you can give them a warm welcome too. Thank you. I think I've left my telephone. Yes.
Thank you very much, Lynette. I prefer what's written in the program, that I will be interviewing Mr. Trevor Manuel. Now, Trevor and I have crossed paths.
And swords.
Very seldom. But I think it's more than 30 years. And I'm very grateful to Ambrosetti that you've finally given me a chance to interview him, which is wonderful. Last night I see Trevor was making a very correct point that what South Africa needs is younger leaders who understand technology a lot better. But there are occasions when some old greybeards could help. And I can't think of anyone better than Trevor to reflect on the current state of our economy. And also, we're going to do a bit of retrospective reflection on why we made some serious errors in the last 10 years. It's a costly period. What did happen, and what are the challenges ahead? So I'm going to really say very little. We will say a little bit about Africa and the challenges of Africa and the massive opportunities of Africa. But I think it's a good moment to do some reflection. Those of you at last year's summit will remember that it was a very intense and tense time in South Africa as we built up towards the African National Congress's conference. And as you know, at that time, some very important political developments took place, and we now have a new president. And I think we have the hope that we will begin to revive our economic fortunes, re-establish our links with Africa and the world on a much firmer footing. But we certainly have challenges, and that's going to be my first proposition to Trevor. Trevor, in your assessment, and I know you've thought about this a lot, what have been the key things that went wrong in the last 10 years, and what challenges does this pose as we try and rebuild? I mean, you playing a very important role in looking at the investment environment, but your reflections would be very useful, I think.
Thank you very much, Alec, and thanks to the Ambrosetti Forum for the opportunity. I mean, you know, as Macbeth said, what's done cannot be undone. But the lessons have to be taken from that period. It was very difficult, and I think that the key issues are that whereas in the early period of our democracy, we needed to work incredibly hard to get systems in place, to build strong institutions, and amongst those issues was a much better communication on policy, providing better certainty, and a much tighter hold on the fiscus and state-owned enterprises. And I think part of what we're seeing now is the costs of the fact that those have unraveled in the way that they have. But let's just move from there. We can spend a lot of time lamenting the past. I think that what's happened during this year is fundamentally important. You know, on the 20th of December last year, it was touch and go, and President Ramaphosa was elected on the thinnest sliver of a victory. But I think that it's understanding not the size of the margin, but what he's done in this year and what that portends for the future. You know, when one thinks about February, 14th of February, you used to celebrate Valentine's Day quite a bit. That was the date. In the afternoon, we had one president, and later that evening, eventually he resigned. 2 days later, we had a new president who delivered a State of the Nation address that drew on a large body of work in the National Planning Commission. He spoke to the NDP. And I think what we've seen in the course of this year speaks largely to the commitments that the president made. And so he committed very strongly to youth employment, and with the private sector in South Africa, you've had the commitment to the Youth Employment Service Initiative. The commitments are in place. I think we'll see the rollout, and these kinds of issues normally take a while. But the fact that the private sector is playing as active a role in it, I think bodes well for the future. Similarly, the Job Summit convened just over 2 weeks ago, and one of the things that had been missing from South Africa for a long time was the fact that government, business and trade unions sat and agreed on something together. And the largest trade unions were there, and sure, there's some trade unions who thought that they shouldn't participate, but COSATU and FEDUSA and NACTU participated and actively made the commitment to the Job Summit, along with all the business organizations and government. And I think that allows us to construct a platform to take us forward. As Pindi said earlier, Thursday and Friday this week, in fact, spilling over into Saturday, there will be the President's Investment Conference. We can also take that forward into early November when, firstly, there will be a conference in New York, South Africa tomorrow, and then immediately after that, the African Development Bank will host its African Investment Conference for Infrastructure right here in Sandton. So the work is ongoing, and I think it's about rebuilding, and in the rebuilding process, not just about getting commitments for the future. The one factor of governance that perhaps took the biggest hit in the past decade was trust. And the emphasis now is on rebuilding that trust. So, the lines of communication are open. There's a lot more transparency in place. And we can focus on building partnerships, because without trust, you can't have partnerships.
Thanks, Trevor. I think for an audience like this, and particularly for visitors from Europe and Italy, say a little bit more about how this collaboration with business has been a very important feature between business, labor, and government. I think it was a hallmark of the transition period of democracy. It was a hallmark of the last 10 years. But it's once again coming to the fore. And I think it'd be interesting for the audience to understand a little bit how that actually works. I mean, you've been part of these discussions, but this is a real working relationship. And maybe you could just spell it out a little bit, right?
Well, if one takes a retrospective view, even ahead of our democracy, you were involved in the National Economic Forum, and that was a forum of trade unions, business and government, trying to establish what the norms were. And there were particular issues that mattered then. There was broad agreement that the government lost its legitimacy and therefore couldn't take decisions on its own. But very soon after that, and drawing from the experience from, amongst others, Italy, we formed the National Economic Development and Labor Council. And so one of the 1994 pieces of legislation was actually the NEDLAC Act. And the idea was that we understand that we must have social dialogue between the major actors without converting this into a negotiating forum as though it were hard wage bargaining. And for a while, I think it developed reasonably. But it's also one of the issues that in the last decade or so had taken a massive pounding. So about 4 or 5 years ago, the attempt was made to reinvigorate it. But the key, you see, if you want these agreements, then it's very important that people who sit in the same room are actually able to commit to the future. And so you've had unfortunate splits in business, and business, or the ability of business as an organized force in the economy to make commitments was actually substantially weakened. And that's something being repaired at the moment. Just last week, there was a call that the Black Business Council must come back in, that you need to strengthen a single voice so that you've got a negotiating and a party in dialogue that has sufficient muscle. Unfortunately, there's been a split in the trade unions as well, and that hasn't come together. And so for as long as you have breakaways, it's very difficult. And with government, I think there's a lot more intent. It's against this backdrop that I think the Jobs Summit is fundamentally important, because it points the way to a different future. We've been in a place that we appreciate it. You can have disagreement without tearing the house down. And now we've got to bring that back into focus.
I think, again, for the audience, one of my assessment would be if the engagement with government, business, and the unions now, we're seeking very concrete programs. So with the Job Summit, there was a range of areas that were agreed for joint action to try and get the economy revived. The Investment Summit, you're going to have, once again, commitments to particular programs. I know, for one, that there's one of our major industries, the automotive sector, is looking at its possible investment program over the next 15 to 20 years, what role it can play in Africa. So it's very much attempting to get a real engagement and break away from what tended to happen where there was government here and business here and complaining that government's not doing what we want it to do, business is not doing what government wants it to do. So this movement towards, once again, an intense dialogue, a practical and concrete dialogue, certainly for me is a very optimistic feature of going forward. Maybe, Trevor, you've already been traveling, and this was one of the most interesting initiatives that President Ramaphosa took, was this concept of appointing yourself and a few other key leaders as ambassadors. Do you want to say a little bit about your experience, how that's gone, what are you encountering?
Yes, just by way of background, the president doesn't ask, he just announces, and he announced 4 of us as investment envoys. Jacko Marie, long-standing pillar of the financial sector in South Africa, a former chief executive of a large bank, Standard Bank. Kobisi Jonas, who's the former deputy minister of finance, he's been very prominent in the news. An upcoming director of a number of companies, who's also been in the economy in a number of sectors. Phumzile Langeni and I are the 4 envoys. And we were deployed to talk to investors across the globe and try and persuade them. And each of us has traveled quite extensively. I mean, I know that we've collected a heck of a lot of air miles beyond that. I was able to spend time in London and intensively probably met with 50 different groups, some of whom have a foothold in Africa, some have experience of South Africa, and they were in fact capable of taking the message forward for us. My next trip was to Dublin, and it was a similar experience, and then I went to New York, again a similar experience. I also got to China whilst the FOCAC meeting, that's the Forum for China and Africa Cooperation, was in session. I had the most amazing meetings over 3 days, from breakfast to late dinners with a range of Chinese operators, many of whom will be at the investment conference this week and make announcements about what they want to do. And then last week I was in Germany. I know that Ambassador Soni, the South African ambassador to Rome, is very keen on getting us to various parts of Italy to take the message there. And I think that this forum extends the platform, and we'd like to be able to take that forward. Whilst the investment conference will happen this week, I think the work in persuading people about what South Africa can offer and the bridge building exercise will continue long into the future.
I think one of the real challenges we face, just want to spend a little bit of time on it and get your views, quite clearly our ability to deliver services and a better set of conditions to poor areas, particularly poor areas where blacks historically have been confined, is one of the biggest problems we face. So this concept of inclusive growth and changing, any thoughts on that? I mean, it's quite clear as the political party, the ANC, as government, there's some very deep and serious thought going into that, which started with the National Development Plan. It's clearly going to be an area of priority. Any thoughts that you might have on that?
Well, I think that the next 7 months or so are going to be fundamentally important in this regard. There's been very unfortunate slippage across government, across the 3 spheres of government, provincial and local government, and I think that there are a variety of different experiences. Pindi Baleni was talking about the Gauteng experience, that wouldn't be the same as that of other provinces. And I think that over the next period and building up to the elections in May next year, it's going to be important that we use the best examples and use that as a benchmark and bring everybody up to it. Similarly, local government, I think, is a very mixed bag, and even at national government, it's a pretty mixed bag. So the focus now, and I think that President Ramaphosa is leading this very strongly, is to revisit all of the norms and ensure that we can deal with the issues for precisely what they are. Closing the gaps between public and private, I think, is an essential part of this. In the many initiatives that I've run, I didn't include the fact that on Friday and Saturday last week, there was a very important summit on the health sector. It brought, and health is an interesting issue because the provision of the service is largely a provincial competence. We've expressed the desire, and the National Development Plan does this as well, to move towards equalizing healthcare with a national health insurance scheme in place. But if you want equalization, it's going to be quite important to lift the public sector and ensure that the private sector can use its experience and influence. And the summit on Friday and Saturday last week was largely focused on that. I think there'd be other similar examples. I think that what's also important is to see the coming together of private and public sector in particular economic activities. I don't want to dwell into the areas that Minister Khadebe may raise this afternoon, but you know, there'd been an early agreement on independent power producers, especially in respect of renewables. It was held up for quite a long time unnecessarily. And a few months ago, Minister Khadebe led the process. The IPPs are now in place, and we've got feed-in tariffs on wind and solar, and I think that this speaks to a different kind of future. Those kinds of changes speak to the possibilities of an engagement between public and private, and that portends well for a number of areas where I think service delivery has actually fallen into the background. The focus of the next period must be on a strong policy, predictable policy, rather than doing favors for friends.
And I recall when we began carrying out reforms to facilitate public-private partnerships, because these were not that common in South Africa previously. One of the initiatives you took was to ensure we set up a specialist unit to deal with the complexities of these public-private partnerships. And the point you've just made, that we were doing extremely well with the renewable program, and then we lost capacity to make sure the program moved forward quickly. So I think that's also going to be something we're going to have to rebuild, a lot of this institutional strength to ensure that we strengthen the public-private partnership possibilities. One of the key pillars of our policy throughout has been that South Africa's economy is nothing without Africa. I think this is one of the most deep realizations that we've had over the decades, that we are essentially, if African economies don't develop, we're not going to develop. So I recall those very intense early years of trying to build much closer links with our neighbors. And I'm delighted to see Antonio Matos, who you and I will both remember. I think there was something like 20 meetings between presidents of Mozambique and South Africa to develop something I'm sure you'll talk about.
There was a marriage that happened along the lines.
There was a marriage that happened too, yeah. But to build these corridors, and Antonio is the expert on it, of the Maputo Development Corridor. But it's clear we need to re-engage as South Africa. We have a big economy, but the truth is we need Africa as much as they might be able to benefit from us. So what are the first steps that you would think of that we should begin working on? I mean, we've already seen President Ramaphosa has quite clearly indicated that he's more engaged with Africa. But any of your thoughts on what we should be driving there?
Well, I'm delighted that the membership of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has been ratified by most countries now. And that's an important step forward. But it's quite important that we don't just treat the agreement, ratified as it is, as those many agreements that we can recite from our youth. It's going to be quite important that we can change the parameters of economic development country by country. This does mean that a forum such as the Ambrossetti Forum here begins to look at Africa and African opportunities. Manufacturing is going to be fundamentally important because that will provide the wherewithal for African trade. Similarly, I think that which is why I referred to the African Development Bank infrastructure conference in a fortnight or so, we need to capitalize a major infrastructure program. And I'm holding out a view that it can't just be the development of ports. We need to develop road and rail networks across the African continent. We need to make those investments in border crossings. We need to make the investment in IT to ensure that we can digitalize many of the transactions that have held up progress. We need to invest also in the kind of irrigation infrastructure so that we can unlock the massive agricultural opportunities that Africa presents. The world needs food. The world wastes too much food, but the world needs food and Africa can produce it. But we will never produce it unless we have the infrastructure to get inputs in, product out, storage, which means energy and for cold storage, and the irrigation systems. These are going to be the fundamentally important issues over the next while. And I think it's these kinds of issues that we should be able to model to some degree and then hold governments to account for what happens to the quality of life of people.
I think for our visitors from Europe, Italy, earlier this year, an agreement was reached called the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is a very substantial agreement. It's certainly the most detailed of all the agreements we've seen from the past. It envisages as well a specific program that will deal with industrialization, which is important. So it's going to be a fairly complex negotiation, but I think that the big advantage is that for the first time, it will force the African economies to confront the realities of trade facilitation, of negotiating tariff reductions, of increasing trade between ourselves. One of the key aspects that we all agree on is that there needs to be an industrialization process. Manufacturing has to develop in Africa. We can't just trade bananas between ourselves. We know that the great trade systems of the world are essentially trade in manufactured products as much as they are in commodities. So one of the areas that South Africa will be looking at, as you know, the automotive industry in South Africa is quite an important industry for us. It ranks as one of the top employment sectors. It's about 7% of our GDP. And we're taking a very serious look at trying to form partnerships with other possible assembly industries in Africa. So there will be extremely concrete engagement around industrialization and industrial development. Manufacturing, as you've indicated, is key to that. And in a discussion we were having earlier, we're talking to Europe here, we would really urge you to focus on that area. The manufacturing sector is where South Africa, we've got large corporations, we've got small enterprises, but to some extent over the last 30 years, Some of our medium-sized manufacturing activity was hollowed out. So this is an area where I think partnerships are very good. Some of the partnerships we've already got here in the automotive sector have been outstanding successes. So Africa is definitely engaging in a very concrete way in trying to link and build our economies. Trevor, I'm going to chuck to you. Now this is where I enjoy being an interviewer. Tough. Clearly, we can't not discuss the implications of the commissions that we're having, where we're trying to assess what happened. How do you see this playing out? What is the importance of us reassessing what happened in terms of malfeasance, misgovernance? Your thoughts on that?
Look, there are a couple of commissions running. The biggest of those is the Zondo Commission, which is headed by a Deputy Chief Justice, looking at state capture. And there's a second one dealing with just the revenue service. Let's deal with the second one. The revenue service used to be the real jewel in the crown. I mean, it was built into a formidable institution. I know that, thing of pride, the IRS in the US once wrote a letter asking to come to South Africa to understand why the South African Revenue Service is as successful as it is. And then it was torn down. And what the commission headed by Justice Nugent is doing is actually drilling in and trying to understand so that it can be built on a better platform. And I think similarly the Zondo Commission is dealing with a lot of detail. The problem is when you lance a boil, it's not pretty, but it's necessary. And that's the process that we will live through over the next period. I know that the orange light is on, but whilst we're talking about work being done, one of the issues that has worried some of our friends outside of South Africa is the land question. What President Ramaphosa did was to put together a team of the 10 perhaps brightest minds in respect of the land question, chaired by Dr. Vuyo Mahlati, but it has lawyers, agricultural academics, economists, agricultural practitioners, large and small, representatives of organized agriculture coming together, and hopefully they will make a report that speaks to our Constitution and Section 25, which is the property clause. It's been very reassuring for many of our friends to know that this team of advisors is working and that they will report quite soon. Hopefully these matters can be dealt with within the course of the next few weeks so that South Africa and the world invested in South Africa can be reassured about the rationality of the processes.
Thank you very much, Trevor. We that generation of politicians who, he was an agitator in the communities, I was an agitator in the trade unions, so we're quite happy to engage in questions and combat. But what we're going to do is we'll stay on the stage. The next panel is also linked to finance, so you'll have a chance to criticize, comment, attack us any minute. And with 3 seconds to go, thank you very much.